Добрый день, друзья! Приближается Новый год, а значит традиционная встреча с Дедом Морозом и Снегурочкой. Ну или Снегурочками, у кого как. Вы знаете, каждый год несет нам, кроме встречи с Дедом Морозом и Снегурочками, еще и такую интересную штуку, как прогнозы Саксо Банка. Иногда это прогнозы шокирующие, иногда удивляющие, иногда веселящие, но всегда это прогнозы достаточно такие непростые. Эти прогнозы от Саксо Банка выходят уже 20 лет. Некоторые из них сбывались, некоторые нет. Можно по-разному к ним относиться, но игнорировать их нельзя. По крайней мере, лично я каждый год после выхода прогнозов получаю сотни вопросов. И вопросы такие: ну вот вы знаете, тут Саксо Банк предвещает нам такие вот испытания, такие-то сложности. А что вы, Евгений Борисович, думаете? И вот я, бедный, вынужден сидеть и думать, что ж такое ответить умное на все эти прогнозы. Вроде как и хорошо, вроде как и правильно, а с другой стороны, сами понимаете, вопросы непростые. А вдруг сбудется? А я скажу: ребята, все это ерунда. Так что все это непросто. Но что касается Саксо Банка, я давно с ними работаю, большое количество лет, считаю их очень надежными, очень качественными брокерами и плюс очень хорошей аналитической командой. Вы знаете, у меня огромное удовольствие было работать с их главным экономистом и участвовать в совместных передачах. Я имею в виду Стином Якобсеном. Интеллигент, причем интеллигент высочайшей пробы, умница. Так что работать по их прогнозам, в частности по прогнозам того же Стина, это всегда подарок судьбы. Друзья, я хочу анонсировать вышедший в этом году прогноз. Да, он необычный, но и год был необычный. В конце концов, знаете, такие года у нас один на непонятно сколько. Так что, вы знаете, я уже с трудом могу сказать, что сбудется и что не сбудется. Мне кажется, что в этой жизни может сбыться все, даже прогнозы Саксо Банка. Так что, как говорят французы, enjoyте. How are you doing?
I'm very good.
Very glad to see you. I have to
Like,
tell you that I am very glad to see you in my channel. How are you?
I'm very good.
All right, so the year is approaching, new year is approaching, and we have to see the new focus of new dramatic focus of Saxo Bank. Let
Yeah,
me ask you, tell me please, who is the author? Are you writing it personally?
I write it with my team.
So it's the product of the team.
Yeah, so I decide the general theme. So, like, the theme this year is the future is now, which is all about the acceleration that the pandemic has given us, right? So, but then the team pitch in, and we have good fun. This is actually, I just realized this morning, it's the 20th year I do this. 20 years. I mean, it shows you how old I am, right?
You're not looking so old.
I'm looking very old, but thank you for lying.
Frankly, I'm not lying at all, but let's let's go further. First of all, in the Saxo Bank predictions 2020, you predicted the comeback of Democrats. Have you seen any other of your predictions come true? So, what are they?
So I think the first thing to say is that we have no hope, no wish to actually predict anything. So this is very much an exercise of us trying to provoke you personally into taking a different view or pushing back or agreeing on something that could be changed in the market. So you can say that I know for everybody, it's always how many did you get right last year, relatively to. I can tell you two things. First of all, a lot of the things that we predict cannot even happen physically inside the last year. So let's take the case of Hungary, which we got the trade right. So we said, euro half will go to 375. I think the high was 372 or something. So basically, we called the direction right. But there's no way that Hungary could leave the EU inside 2020. But what we have then had a few people do is to look over all of the outrageous predictions that we ever done. And in that process, it turns out we have about 2.5 right every year inside 36 months. So we had the Brexit many years ago. We had in 2008, I think we had 7 out of 10 right. And some years we have 0 right. But this year, as you rightly say, I will allow myself to say we got the Democrats right, because 1 year ago, everyone told us we were the most crazy people in the world, predicting that the Democrats would win the presidency and potentially even having a blue wave, which is now still could happen in when the vote in January goes on in Georgia. And the second one we had right this year, as I just said, was the fact that euro half would go to 375. Yes, we are, we missed 2 points, but I think getting, more than a 10% weakening of the half right was a pretty good call. But let me stress again, as also as we look forward to 21, we don't necessarily think it will happen in 21, but we firmly believe that the underlying sort of themes is in place. 21 we call the year of disruption, and I think it's pretty clear it was a year's disruption. But we have no concept, we have no wish, we don't even think personally that we have any ability to predict the future. But we do know through these 20 years of exercise is that it's a very useful exercise to provoke ourselves, but not least to provoke you as an audience to think differently. The best thing that can happen to me is that after this conversation today, you're saying this Stine and his colleagues, they are stark raving mad. They have no idea what they talk about. I can just tell you what you hate the most is what is most likely to happen. That's the final experience of having done this for 20 years. Every single year, there's one specific call that everybody hates. One year it was that Apple would halve. Do you know what happened? Apple halved. Another year it was gold to go down by 30%. It went down 30%. The Brexit deal was hated last year. The Democrat was hated. So whatever you hate the most, probably you should put on a piece of paper and say, that could be the most likely one to happen in 21.
Okay, frankly, everybody are looking on your focus, and I understand that everybody understand that a little bit grotesque, a little bit joke sometimes, but in every joke there is some small percentage of the joke. But okay, let's move forward, and we are looking forward to hearing your outlook for the following year. Let's start. And obviously, the main topic of the year is coronavirus. Coronavirus break all the rules. Coronavirus break all the understanding of the reality. And frankly, it breaks all our life. For example, I understood suddenly that I can sit everywhere. I can sit nearby of you. By the way, where are you located just now?
I'm at my summer house, which is the northern part of Zealand. I tell you, it's not summer here, but I love to go there when I have to work very hard and talk to very clever people like yourself. Then I go into my summer house.
But frankly, you can sit in Zanzibar, in Mongolia, in Honduras. We can sit everywhere, and the quality of our work will be the same, no plus minus. Okay, so it breaks our community, it's break all the rules of our life. So it's really amazing. By the way, what about the coronavirus? Have you got it, or you avoided this happiness?
Surprisingly, I have avoided it totally. And I have to say, of course, Denmark is not the worst place to be based for even if you get corona. So it's relatively under control here. But you know what? I'm an old man. I don't party. I don't go out. So the likelihood of me getting corona is very small. I drive directly into the garage as the bank, and I go sit at my desk, and then I go home again and go for a run with my dog, and I live in my summer house or in a farm. So I'm not really exposed as many people, unfortunately, are forced to be in terms of going to work or going in a public transport.
By the way, are you planning to vaccine yourself, or you want to avoid it? What do you think about the vaccination?
The vaccination, I'm definitely having the vaccination. I have in particularly very high faith in the European Agency on Healthcare. I think that to some extent the US FDA has been politicized through what the Trump administration has done. But if the European agency is telling me that this is okay, I'm definitely going ahead with the vaccination. And I think, it of course is going to be voluntary, but tell you what, I'm my age group. I'm the last one in the world to get the vaccine anyway. So it's not like I'd be the last 10% of everyone that gets the vaccine, because of course it has to go to the healthcare workers, it has to go to the elderly who are exposed. So there's a key distribution on how it's going to happen, and I promise you, I am at the very last end of the queue, and rightly so.
All right. What about the Russian vaccine Sputnik? You're not planning to use it?
Which Sputnik are we talking about? The one with vodka or the vaccine? No, it's the.
You mean we can combine it?
I think it's a good combination, probably. I'm sure the efficacy of the drug gets up. I don't know enough about the Sputnik. I don't think details has been shared. So, I'm a classic European guy. I stay with the European agency. Yes, they are slow. Yes, they are a little bit tedious, but they do a proper job, and they have the right sort of way to do it correctly. And as you indicate with the question, there is this there's a lot of health issue and a lot of health policy involved in how the vaccine and what kind of vaccine you get. But to me, the vaccine an interesting social story. But if you look at the market, and in particularly right now, if you look at the commodity market, the market is already pricing that we have a vaccine, either everything from Sputnik to everything else. So, and we do know if the economic impact in the short term from the second wave and even a potential third wave, we know what the response is going to be. It's going to be more fiscal spending, infrastructure, green transformation, and certainly further support of the job losses and demand. So we know the policy response, if it takes longer time, we all wish and hope that it goes faster, but if it goes faster, it would only accelerate what is already in place, which is a commodity market which is booming. And I think, not outrageous, but I think one of the big trades for 21 could be the ruble. I think the ruble underneath the energy but also through Norilsk and others through the metals has a huge potential. But that's a real forecast. That's not my outrageous forecast.
All right. So let's move forward. And first of all, I wouldn't ask you, by the way, what to buy and what to sell, because we will talk about it a little bit later. But I would like to start from the digital currencies. As far as I understand, one of your predictions is in the sphere of digital currencies and concerning dedicated to the China events. So open us.
Yes, that one I think, and of course, if you do 10 predictions, some of them are having a higher probability to happen than others. I think this one is, could be happening. And what we say in the outrage prediction is that in 21, China will go one step further than the experimental digital currency they have in place right now. And they will use the digital currency to fully open the capital account. And when I talk about the capital account, of course, talking about the fact that domestic Chinese cannot freely take money out of the country. I think the limit right now is about $50,000 a year. And even that number sometimes gets closed down because there's too much capital flight. What I think is happening, and it's to some extent already priced into the Chinese currency rate, is that if you have a digital currency as your base for your economy, you can control every single payment that goes in and out of the country. And through that way, China could effectively allow you and me and everybody who are non-Chinese domicile to take the money in and out. And one of the main restrictions I hear from investors, and for the record, Saxo has through the Geely ownership access to all of the Chinese markets, both the bond markets and the equity market. People love to talk it, they like the concept, but they're a little bit nervous about the money. But imagine the capital account was open fully and transparently through a digital currency that you can transact with through the central bank. Then I think it will open the floodgates for money coming into China. And the base effect of that will be enormous. If you take MSCI global emerging market, China is 60% of the weight, but very few people actually have that 60% weight. Overall, the Chinese stock market is the second largest in the world, but it's under-owned by the rest of the world for a number of political reasons. But if you look, for instance, simplistically, if you look at all of the IPOs, so all of the new companies in the world that will be listed over the next decade, over 60% of those companies will come from China and from the platform like Tencent, JD.com, Alibaba, and the likes, who, apart from being very profitable online companies, also is the biggest venture funds in China. So for me, it's only a matter of time before we accelerate into a market that starts to use China benchmark. And I think the critical part here will be the digital currency. But if you allow me, we have more than one digital. Another one we have, which I think is super interesting, is that we make the claim that in 21, fake news and news aggregated will move to a blockchain model. If you think of blockchain as an instrument, it's perfectly fitted to deal with verification of news. Today, when you and I read the news, and it doesn't really matter whether it comes from Russia, Denmark, or Germany, or US, we don't know whether the news is fake or real or what is the facts. Imagine you had a blockchain where you put all this information up on, and 2 to 3 people need to confirm the validity of the statement embedded in it. And then it was released onto platforms like Facebook and others who use algorithmic basis for this. And what is interesting is that Verizon, the US telecommunication company, already has in its very early infant stages, but they have a verification tool. And what that will do is somewhat counterintuitive what I personally think will happen. But I think, imagine if Facebook was allowed to use a blockchain to verify all its news instead of having, individual people basically doing control of information. Instead, there will be a blockchain-based evolution. And what I think is interesting from that into your cryptocurrency concept is that I personally think that blockchain is only one user case away from being adapted. I mean, we all know that the future on tax will be based on blockchain. We all know that the biggest problem in taxing companies today is what is called intercompany prices. But on a blockchain, you can't hide the intercompany prices. You can see with full transparency. Yes, you and I, again, will lose some privacy, but it will be a fair distribution of tax. And certainly companies will be no longer able to just lawyer up or auditor up and try to get away with not paying enough taxes, because you can see exactly where the money comes from if it happened on a blockchain or on digital. So those are the 2 ones that are interlinked directly to crypto space blockchain plus the new evolution.
Let me ask you, Donny the Great was fighting dramatically against the fake news. But frankly speaking, he was himself a very big and huge fake news. It's rather funny, but it's so. So look, my question is that the world is fighting against the fake news. I will show you more. The world is fighting against pirates. For example, me personally, I am fighting for them every day, because they are stealing my personal intellectual property, and it's very difficult. Indeed, it's dramatically difficult. And you suppose that the blockchain will change the world, and it will be the game changer, something dramatic game changer.
No, absolutely. And as I say, it's not that blockchain is not ready. It's just that we don't have a big user case. We don't have the eureka moment for a lot of people who start to understand, hang on a minute, we can do taxes better we can do legal contracts better. And we can certainly, as we doing the outrageous call this year, where we say fake news is taken away. But simply, if the old journalistic rule, of course, is that you need to authentication from 2 independent sources to the story you have. So in real terms, you need 3 independent people to confirm a story is true in order to print it. That was the old rule of journalism. In comes Facebook and blogs and the internet and the ability of social media. And we have given way the ability to actually authenticate even newspapers who became too biased one way or the other in across the globe. But imagine we take that back and we create a valid way of looking at news. When you look at news through a blockchain fake news chain, which proves that everything is information on here has been proven to be accurate, then we have a different conversation. Because the problem right now, and you see that clearly in both the places you have connection to, that the narrative can be created that everything is fake news. Everyone that doesn't like what is being said about them says it's fake news. But the fact is that I'm old enough to know there is reality and facts. They are still the basis of society. But if society loses sight of the fairness of the ability to distinguish between facts and fake news, then the young people, the people who doesn't have an inquisitive mind like you and me, they get totally lost. And to be honest, I'm lost myself now. I spent, 25% of my time trying to verify the information I just read as being interesting. In the old days, I knew it was true. Now I have to go check what is the source, who owns that web site, who is really trying to sell me something. And it's just waste of time. It is an absolute inverse productivity game that we have involved with in the news media.
Not only you, me also. Every day I'm looking which of the news is fake, which news no. But let's move from the news about the fake to the real fake, the biggest fake in the world. I mean, the biggest fake story of the world. I'm speaking about the precious metals. You know that you love it very much. And beforehand, we were speaking together with you about the gold and your feeling about the gold. You are very optimistic in this field. But I suppose that the predictions of the year of Saxo Bank, there is something concerning the gold or silver or platinum. By the way, concerning the platinum, I am very bullish. What about you?
I have to admit, disclaiming that one of my biggest position right now is long the futures of platinum. So I've substituted some of my gold exposure to silver and to platinum. And in terms of the outrageous prediction, Ole Hansen, my commodity analyst, who is ranked top 10 in the world, he is out saying that, as an outrageous call, that silver could double in 21. And the driver for that is that, when silver rises in price relative to gold, it's normally because the inflationary environment gets worse, or you get a higher inflation because industrial. So the difference between gold and silver is that gold really only has a store of value, and of course buying nice presents for our wives. But apart from that, it's a store of value and jewelry. But whereas silver has an industrial aspect to it. Another fact is, of course, that when you mine, the way you mine silver is actually some of the other industrial metals. So it's a residual product out of the mining that you do from zinc and copper and other things, and then you get silver. And why is that interesting? That's interesting for one reason, because we have underinvested into any physical structure doing this digitization. Peter Garnery, my equity analyst, likes to say, if you look at the S&P 500 today, 80% of the value is immaterial. So non-physical capital, non-physical building, non-physical infrastructure overall. 80% of the value is in IP and the concept that people have a free cash flow. So only 20% of the market value in the world today is in the physical. And what I think we've seen in 2020 and has seen accelerate is this digitalization, the ability to go online. So the physical constraints is now so large that right now, as you and I speak, we have the highest container ship freight rates ever in the world at a time where we're talking about double-dip recession in Europe and the US. We have copper is up 35% on the year. Platinum, as you know, is up about 10% after today. And all of the commodity complex now has a yield role. So in other words, if you own commodities now for the first time in decades, you're actually being paid carry to be in the commodities, which of course is a huge difference, because one of the reasons why we didn't like commodity over the last 10 years was the negative role, i.e. just holding platinum or other commodities, we would have lost money from the role of the contract. So that's changing. And then the kicker, of course, which is the most important part, that last 20 years we lived under the sort of the motto that don't fight the central banks. I think right now we need to live on a different one, which is don't fight the governments on green transformation. If you look at the EU budget, if you look at the President-elect Biden, they all talk about green transformation. And what's interesting, of course, with platinum and cobalt and everything else, they are used in every single version of green transformation in energy, catalyst, auto catalyst, and all these things. So what is happening is that you're being paid money to be long these instruments. There's an underinvestment over the last 20 years because they haven't made any return on capital. You have the physical structure of our society today being too small in terms of logistics relatively to the demand on delivering last mile and overall shipping goods. And then finally, you have the fact that the biggest investment at all over the next 20 years will be into green transformation, which have huge amount of quantities of commodities which have a bad supply demand equation. And hence, Ole says one of the ones that can benefit massively here is silver.
Tell me, which price of silver? So your main topic is silver from them. Is it right?
So for our range prediction is silver, but our real call for 21. So at the start of 2020, our biggest sort of commitment in terms of advisory to customers was that the 2020 was going to be a year of green transformation. Equivalently, in Q1 this year, we will make our Q1 outlook report about the new emerging commodity cycle. So for 21, we think that the commodity cycle will start, and it will start to give you excess return, create alpha. But on top of that, we also think it's the early signs of the inflation coming back because we no longer use the banking system. So this velocity of money concept doesn't exist. Actually, in Israel, where you are, or in Russia, or in Denmark, or in Germany, the government is putting money directly into the pocket of the consumers instead of through extending financial conditions through the banking system. The banking system has become obsolete. And by the way, banking index in Japan is still down 90% from the low, and European banking index is still the worst performing index at all the last 10 years in Europe. So the banks are not coming back, but what is coming back is the consumption and the constraints of the physical system relatively to all this digitization.
All right. Now we are moving from fakes, from precious metals. We are moving to the very interesting theme that in the beginning I was extremely against it. I will tell you. We are speaking about the unconditional income.
Yeah.
I mean, absolute unconditional income of the people.
Yeah.
My point of view, the state must provide to the people, first of all, the possibility to make profit, the possibility to make money, possibility to work conditions, I will say so, but not the fish itself. We have they have to study us to fish, but not to provide us the fish itself. So now unconditional basic income, it's one of the trend of our times. Nowadays, it's our times. And now even me, that my wife is writing, is joking that right than me is only the wall.
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway.
And as of course your wife is always right, and in this case she's also right. Again, see what we both in a lot of the topics we talked about, I think there is a generation gap. You and I see the world through facts, through physical world cash flows. But what I call the West Coast money, California money, Silicon Valley money, the Generation Z, millenniums, they see the world differently. They see it as a optimization of quality of life. That's why the sharing economy, that's why the platform economy has taken off. It's not because you and I don't really spend any money. We pretend that we do, but we don't really spend any money. We're cheap bastards in that category. But the young people, they have huge challenges in terms of paying for their education. They have, the first apartment has become massively expensive. I think we talked about that last time. But what we need to understand, you and I, is that by 2030, whether you and I want it or not, 2 billion jobs is going to be lost globally. So that's roughly 25% of all people in the world is going to be unemployed. And that is either a massive problem or a great opportunity and a more balanced society. Let's take the worst equation first. If we change nothing between now and 2030, 2 billion jobs means that the transfer of, which is your argument, from the state will become so big that it's killing the economy, is killing the entrepreneurship and everything else. My version is that we have to remember that evolution is infinite. Evolution continues to be innovation. Evolution continues to grow. So I presume, and I think I have good reason to believe that there will be enough growth, there will be enough ways of doing things to create a top line growth in the world that makes us afford it. Do we need a redistribution? Absolutely. And in here comes the universal basic income, which, the problem with universal basic income is that everyone has their own definition of it. A lot of people think that by definition, universal income is getting something for nothing. That is not necessarily the case. I will recommend for anyone who sees this interview to look up Milton Friedman talking about universal basic income in the 1960s. And the version he has, which is negative capital income, is the most fair system ever, basically because, people who don't want to work, they get half of what the people who wants to work and vice versa. But that's a different story. Let's stay with the theme here. But universal basic income, 2 billion people, we accept that premise. My argument, my team's argument is that what the pandemic has done is accelerating that trend, because as you say, 2 years ago, I introduced that in the public space that we should talk about universal basic income, at least as a concept. And I was, despite I'm known as a libertarian economist, everyone told me I was a complete idiot, right? And now 2 years later, it's implemented without no discussion at all. That's the fact. We already have universal basic income. We also have a loss of 2 billion jobs over the next 20 years, 10 to 20 years. But how about we have a future where more and more people who doesn't want to work, and I think a lot of people during the pandemic has realized, as you started with saying, you can work from home. That means you don't need to live in an expensive city. Why are you sitting on a train like in London? I feel desperately sorry for people in London who live 1.5 hours outside London, sit on a tube on terrible condition, go to work, go back and spend 3 hours a day going back and forth for the job. Don't you think these guys would love to work, a little bit less? And by the way, if they don't have to go to London, they could live on a salary which was only 70% of what they have today. And by the way, if they didn't at all need to go to London, they could live further out, meaning that they could buy houses which cost 1/10, 1/50 of what it would cost to live in London, meaning that through just people setting up themselves differently, some people can work the same amount of productivity hours, but away from home in a safer, in a cheaper environment in terms of cost to themselves. And by the way, they can be there after school when their kids go home. So we also get a better social sort of coherent systems. But there will also be a number of people who doesn't want to work. And I think you and I know a few people ourselves, and at least in our societies, that says, listen, I think it's all fine for you to run around Stien and work, 60 hours a week, but I just want to work 20 hours if I get enough. And then, in the summer, I'm going to work some extra, in the winter, I'm going to work some extra hours because in the summer, I want to be on a beach somewhere, right? And who are we to tell them not to be doing that? I mean, there's also, look at all the apprenticeships, all of the skills that we're losing in the world. I know in Israel you can probably still get it, but in Denmark, if I want to go to a barber, it's impossible. I mean, there's no one who do a shave for you anymore. And all of these skills, from tool makers to barbers to people who do handcraft, people who keep alive all of the tradition we have in the Israeli history, in the Russian history, whatever, they're being lost. Imagine if we can afford to revigorate that, to create it inside a concept, to get the village to provide services again, relatively always having to go to a supermarket in the cities. So you can easily see we can all of a sudden, and I get really excited about this, as you can tell from my body language even, but think about how if we can do everything cheaper, we can do it better and at a higher quality. You can see your children. My son can see his children more than I ever did, because the only thing I ever did was work. He can actually have a balanced life. And the interesting thing, he could do it at 1/10, 1/5 of the cost of what I did, because he will have the ability to live outside. So what we're saying is that at UBI, universal basic income, will kill the big cities. I don't see why anyone would want to go to the big city unless they need to.
And this is one of your predictions, right?
That's one of our positions. And I think, real estate, you already see it in New York. Very expensive apartments are falling 20, 30%. and it doesn't even trade. People are just moving into, Long Island. They're moving to Connecticut. They're moving upstate New York. And for the record, the price is half of that what it is in the city. And by the way, they don't need free cars anymore. They only need one car, and they're gonna buy an electric car instead, and they're gonna be more fit because all of a sudden they're not spending 3 hours a day sitting on a train eating crappy sandwiches, right?
By the way, I'm awfully sorry of interrupting you. My oldest son is living in Canada, in Toronto. So he bought a house, very good house, not in the center, but in a very good district of Toronto. After coronavirus, he took his girlfriend and they moved together to the oil district there. I mean, another part of Canada, everything much cheaper. She receives 2,000 bucks per month, and he's working on the distance, and they're feeling very nice. And he told me, Father, what I'm doing, we can buy the house nearby or the lake, and everything, clean lakes, fantastic weather, fantastic views, everything, and we can move there. Everything is cheaper. He was shocked. So all your predictions on this field are absolutely right. But my question is, we all are social people, and we cannot live in the virtual reality. You're speaking about the theme that big cities will be broken. The concept of big cities will be broken. But what about our moving to the nightclubs? What about our meetings with people? Okay, we can talk with you and we can drink together. Hello, even vodka, but I don't like it. But
No, but your take and your story, your son's story is a great one. But when things open up again, they're going to be flying everywhere, left, right, and center to have a weekend in New York, have a weekend in Miami, going to Tel Aviv, one of the best cities in the world to go partying. Obviously, being Tel Aviv, but they're going to be spending money, but they're just spending differently. It's not going to be the working people they use. And I think to some extent the cities is doing everything to keep businesses out. I don't know how it is in Israel, but in Copenhagen you can't even bring a car today. So it's also impractical to be in the city, and people who live in the city want to protect. They want to have more green areas and such. Imagine with that we start tearing down infrastructure, warehouses in the middle of the city, or convert them into apartments. So you get a bigger supply of real estate, and the prices will come down 40-50%. Then all of a sudden people will migrate back from the rural areas again. But I'm not concerned about the culture, the art, the restaurants. People still want to be in the city, as you say. They want to be going to a nice nightclub. They want to go to the right restaurant. I don't think that changes. But what changes is they don't want to go on the 5 o'clock train in the morning to be in New York by 6:30, and then on the 1800 to be home at 2000. No one. I mean, I think the pandemic really taught us that is not going to happen. And by the way, it's an acceleration of what happens anyway. And even the trade your daughter did, you can do. Denmark is a minuscule, small country, but if I was willing to live 1.5 hours from Copenhagen, I could buy a house for 1/15 of what I could cost in where I live.
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
And imagine if my salary, which is nothing, obviously, because I'm not worth anything, but imagine my salary, how much they could stretch if I didn't have to pay 4/15 more than that relevant person who lives 190 minutes away from Copenhagen. And it's just, I could live like a king. Now I live like a poor peasant instead.
Okay, let's move from the theme of urbanism to the theme of energy, because urbanism and energy is the common things, and if it's the themes that are going one from other, you have enough energy, you can live everywhere. And energy, it's, by the way, it's everything for our life. Yeah. So I'm absolutely sure that one of your focus is based on something changes on our energy life. What are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so we have an outrageous call, which is probably the most outrageous, but something that is going to happen between 0 and 10 years from now. But we think fusion energy is probably the only real high intensity energy evolution that can happen. And what happened in 2020 was that MIT in laboratory experiments has been able to harvest a huge amount of energy from fusion. And why that's relevant? That's exactly relevant for what you say, because everything anyone on this Zoom today has done has been involved with electricity and consumption of electricity. Imagine the marginal cost, the cost of energy was zero or close to zero, which is what fusion can offer us. We will have the highest productivity gains in world history. You will be able to be quantum computing because that is energy resourceful. All of the online businesses are driven on service. They will be running far better on smaller computer cards. But also think of in terms of in our lifetime, the biggest limiting factor on productivity has been the cost of energy, because why renewables only 28% of the energy production in the world today, 18% of the energy production today, 28% of electricity. It's because they're too expensive. But imagine if you could access energy and accelerate some of these processes through that quantum AIs and others, we will move to a total different. And don't forget, quantum computing is the computer we have in our hand is in terms of an Apple or Samsung phone is a million times more powerful than the computer that took the Americans to the moon. I mean, the Americans navigated to the moon with 512K. I don't know your phone, but I think mine is it's up in Teta something. I don't know how much capacity, but that story I'm telling you, because the difference between the computers we have today and quantum is exactly the same. You have a supercomputer in your Apple phone today against going to the moon in the late, in what is it, 69 on 512K. It will be the same step up. It will be massive. I mean, we are talking about billions of iteration and less energy consumption. And the energy consumption could also be leaning to that we can actually do CO2 reduction and the likes. So what we're saying is that, listen, we can be negative about the future. We can be negative about the amount of jobs. But we think that and in particular, the vaccine science path that we see, I think I'm surprised how fast science came up with a vaccine. Whether we're talking about the Sputnik or the AstraZeneca or whatever. I mean, no one would have said that we could have done that inside 9 months. This is just astonishing. Imagine what we've done in healthcare on the immune system, on the vaccine, happen in energy, whatever. We are really releasing everything. And again, going back to the urbanization unit base, imagine energy was just half of what is today. We could afford so much more, because although energy per se is not expensive with a dollar a barrel around $45, $47, it's still a huge part of every single input. It is a huge part of running servers. It's a huge part of flying or wherever. If we had fusion energy, we will not be, holding back on flying and everything else. So we think, and we admit it's the most far-fetched sort of prediction we do right now. But do not sell science, do not sell math, do not sell the world short on its ability to actually come up with something that can make sure that we can bridge between that disaster story of 2 billion jobs being lost and the present sort of doom and gloom and idiotic way of the way we deal with crisis by issuing more debt and pretending that the world will be good tomorrow.
Excuse me, Stин, what about the current green energy? I'm talking about the wind energy. I'm talking about the solar energy. What about the companies, First Solar, Solar City, and others? They are in trend. So you're breaking the trends. You are making revolution in our hands. And by the way, you will break the prices of these companies.
Absolutely, because I mean, as much as we believe in the green transformation, but you have to be honest. If you look at solar and you look at wind, which is two of the most natural sort of places that investment goes, you also have to realize they deliver low intensity energy, and largely right now they're still supported by government grants and so on and support. So yeah, absolutely. If we came up with a new model of fuel energy and harvesting fusion, then of course these businesses will be out of business because we can do it cheaper, better, and more efficiently right away. But it doesn't mean there's not a role to be played for, and it is kind of provocative. You're right. I mean, we are proactively saying there is a better way to do green transformation. If we really want to do both productivity, reduce the CO2 and the likes, then we need to go the way of science, and science dictate that the most likely path for that is fusion energy.
You know, there is a very good word combination. I mean, those who are breaking the rules, they pay fines. Those who are not doing it, they pay taxes. By the way, it's very good
I like
and
that
extremely for your focus. But now,
I can't be breaking a lot of rules because I pay a lot of taxes.
come to Russia.
Exactly. But Putin has never invited me. But I hope one day I get
Indeed,
I
we
get an
will
offer.
ask him. We
Yeah,
will
yeah,
ask him.
yeah.
Don't worry. Okay. Now let's move to another theme. Look, you're breaking all the rules. You're making the revolution in our hands. Now, and you're making extremely outrageous predictions. Okay, energy we spoke. What are the technological events? What are the technological movements and uh, shocking, I will say, news you predict? And what about in the sphere of technology?
So what is interesting, and again, just shows what a big ignorant I am. But we are very close to getting global Wi-Fi. So the in 2021 we're going to roll out satellites basically that will cover the Earth with Wi-Fi. And then I'm sure a lot of you say, okay, Steen, interesting, but what does that to do with me? It has a lot to do with you, and especially has a lot to do with the developing economies. Think about Africa. Africa's biggest problem is getting electricity and getting signals for the internet. Imagine Africa could access global internet through the satellites, which is coming in place in 21. Then you can release the biggest productivity out of regions that has been lagging behind because of the technology barrier. And of course, you have a technology barrier in places in not only Africa, but also in Latin America, because you don't have the infrastructure investment. Too much money goes to corruption. They roll it out. And if it does come out, it's very expensive and the likes. Now you can just put your phone into the air and there's a global satellite to which you can connect. That will mean that you have access to education. You can go to Khan's Academy and all these things. And you can create a total revolution in how we educate people online, which is happening, as you say, a few times already. I mean, my daughter goes to university in Copenhagen. She has more Zoom education than she has in practice. But imagine the how many people we can reach if we have a global satellite Wi-Fi system that is accessible to everyone at free of charge, which is what is happening. Africa has, when I go to Africa, and I go quite a bit to Africa, but they always say, the next decade is Africa's decade. I actually think the next decade will be Africa's decade, because what they have been lacking is infrastructure. And now you can access and use electricity through very big battery storage. You can access technology, and they already have more bank accounts than they they have more mobile phones than they have bank accounts in Africa. So everything with the technology leap that we've had has so far not gone to Africa. Now with this global Wi-Fi, we see that we will release a huge amount of productivity in Africa, but also in other underdeveloped countries in the world. And imagine we also combine that with very low energy costs, right? And the place to be will be all the places that has underperformed over these years. So this is a huge call on emerging market to outperform over time. And the reason being, and I'm sorry I was so slow, just shows you how little IQ I have, but the global Wi-Fi is a phenomenal concept. It's a little bit, I grew up in black and white TV, then we have color. But when we had the internet, I started uploading at 200K or something. Now we have, my kids are world champions on using the internet. That's what it's done to me in the space of, the first iPhone was what, in 10 years ago, right? Imagine what
Absolutely,
Africa can,
absolutely.
imagine what Africa can do with access to all this internet and education and phones in combination. I really think we stand in front of a human giant step for mankind, as I think Armstrong said on the moon. I think it's a small step for me, a big step for Africa if we get this global Wi-Fi in place.
Yeah, it's great. But speaking frankly, I don't know what will be the reason that I will move my body to Africa region. It's frankly.
Because in resource term, I mean, you take a place like South Africa, they are the best placed, so together with Australia probably and the US, to do whatever they want. They can just go, 1 mile out of the city and they can dig in the ground and they can find everything they need to be self-sufficient. Africa is, home to, some, is home to civilization, is home to nature in an expandable way. And yes, they lost their way through. And to be honest, if we wanted to do history here, it's more to do with you and me than it has to do with himself. But democracy has been slow coming. The structure of the legal system has been slow. But take South Africa again. If South Africa didn't have one of the strongest constitutions in the world, Zuma will still be president in South Africa. I see the fact that Zuma is not president in Africa as a way of adopting a model based on a strong constitution. And if you start adding to that you have productivity through free Wi-Fi and ultimately low energy cost, don't write it off. I mean, you'll be very sorry 10 years from now when you told me that, oh, Africa is not going anywhere. I agree that that is the easy conclusion, but I think the right conclusion is to say that if you want to look at a map of the world, what are the places that need evolution the most? I also think they're the ones that get it. And I also think they will contribute massively to the global growth and our global ability to take this massive blow that we get on the employment jobs front in the world.
There is only one problem in Africa. We will have to spend too much money for security. I'm awfully sorry, because the cost
but remember, security is a function of how many poor people there is. There's really a social dimension. If the split between the rich and the poor is large, you need a lot of security. What I'm saying is that this is going to democratize from the bottom up. And I think a lot of the trends we talk about, a lot of the things we've seen in the social, in the pandemic is the following. And this is my main theme for 21. From 98, when Greenspan bailed out long-term credit, which I think is year zero of the stupidity of the financial system we have today, until 2019, everything in the world was about financial stability, which essentially means making the rich richer through lower interest rate and engineering excess return on capital. But what the pandemic has shown us is that what the governments right now is focused on, including the Russian one, is social stability. And social stability means reducing inequality, doing green transformation and infrastructure, all of which have higher corporate spending, higher government spending, and it's redistributing money back to the higher spending part of the economy, the low income brackets. And that is my real outlook for 21, that the world is looking at a social stability functioning instead of a financial stability. That will be very negative for financial over because inflation will start to rise and interest rate with it. But overall, for the feel good factor, for the ability of the low income to get back on track, I think the next 10 years is going to be the most exciting times in my time in the market.
Okay, we'll see. But we are talking about Africa, we are talking about China, some words about America and the Trump is, and we told nothing about Europe. And Europe for us is everything, and for Russians, and for your bank also, by the way. What is your focus concerning the Europe and the situation with economy and situation with banks, banking system, economical growth, and generally, what you're thinking about Europe? Because your previous predictions were very dramatic, and they were speaking about the Europe and the movement, dramatic and tectonical movements everywhere in the Europe. So what will be further? I'm waiting for it.
Absolutely. And we have a cheeky one this year, which is that France needs to be bailed out by Germany. So I think one of the frameworks that we and a lot of other people has gotten wrong over the years is that EU is an institution that can help anybody. I don't think that's the fact. But I think, coming into 21, France has one of the highest debt to GDPs. They have a social system that is under huge pressure. Healthcare system, which used to be one of the best in the world, is now suffering massively. All of the numbers in terms of growth, in terms of inflation, in terms of future tax revenue is collapsing. That's left the French banking system as very weak, and as you've seen, a number of management changes at the top at the French banks. But one way to mitigate that would be for Germany ultimately to issue some sort of guarantee for the French banking system, and through the issuance of the banking guarantee for the French banking system, revitalizing not only Europe but also their own banking system indirectly through that. We don't think that is entirely unlikely, but it's a new dynamic way of doing it, at least for us, as you say. We have had over the last 20 years a lot of doom and gloom, and also some positive jubilees and whatever in Europe. But I think everything in Europe is bilateral, and the biggest bilateral relationship in Europe is between France and Germany. And ultimately, if Europe needs to survive after the crisis of Hungary and Poland, you need to see a realignment of Paris and Berlin. And inside that Berlin commitment to the EU process is a very calculated bet that the guarantee French banks is probably a good idea. So maybe the real headline is not that Germany bails out France, but that Germany accepts a banking union in Europe or similar. But that would be, I don't think you will tell me next year you were wrong if that happens. You will still say that's pretty much what you also predicted. But two major points here. One, France is extremely weak economically, and they have a lame duck president who, from my perspective, from my chair, is a very good and very visionary president, but he doesn't have the backing in his political system, among other things, because his party is not a real political party, as you know, is a movement, and I think history has shown that political parties that is not anchored in the tradition of the country's network of foot soldiers going around and doing the work for them, they're going to have an issue maintaining the attraction for voters. So Germany doing that. And then we have a second one, if I can take that, of course, and that's a little bit controversial, probably the one that's going to create the biggest headline, and that is that Amazon will go and buy Cyprus.
Oh, it's great. By the way, how much does it cost? How much does Cyprus cost?
No, but I have to say that Cyprus is an innocent bystander in this. Is of course the reason they became Cyprus is that they have exactly the size of Amazon's equity capital. So it's what is interesting, and that is exactly what is interesting. And we're not even after Amazon. We're just making the point, which I think is a valid point, that in today's world, companies like Amazon has more power than any government. So theoretically, and that's what we argue, if Amazon decided that they didn't want to be registered in the US because of new internet protocols or because of a tax, right now they don't pay interstate tax. If they were forced to do that, they could theoretically move the headquarters to a country that was friendly and open for financial arrangements like Cyprus, and constitute themselves, and through lobbyism and pressure, create a government that will support them to have no technology tax in a world of technology tax, and avoiding it, because of course Cyprus is a sovereign nation, right? It sits inside the EU, and maybe you will need be forced. But when we say buy, it's in citation mark. It is relocation Amazon to a jurisdiction, not necessarily Cyprus, but a jurisdiction that is financially savvy to want to come, and through that lobbyism into a sovereign state. But that's that is the story, and that you can say is kind of cheeky, but it's happening every day. What you need to know is that the technology industry outspends the financial industry 2-1 in lobbyism in Washington on K Street. And the financial industry has been, for good reason, for many, many years, the biggest lobbyist, because they've been trying to erg out all kind of advantages and tax credit for time. But even the financial industry spending that amount of money is outspent $2-1 by the technology. So there is an ongoing tug of war between what I call the platform monopolies and government's jurisdiction. And bottom line is that I think it's unfair that all the data they take on you and me from Google and Amazon, it's one thing that they do it and I get in citation mark something for free. But in a fair society, wouldn't all that data be a utility database that everyone could use and evolve and use to free up? So I think 21 is going to be a landmark year in terms of either a attack on the monopoly stature, which is difficult, or at least a taxation that starts to come into what the governments, individual government will say is a fair share of money going to the individual country where they do businesses. But, you know, as I said before, OECD, who has been leading the sort of tax discussion here, has already issued a statement, which France is already in full process of starting January 1st. As far as I know, Spain is also following through, and I think Italy is coming as well in 21. So I think the days where governments would sit back and allow companies to be bigger than themselves is over, simply. That is the big story.
It's absolutely right. I agree with you. But by the way, now, sometimes I'm thinking that the progress is creating monsters. And the human history have never seen such a monster stories before. Because, you know, what does it mean, Amazon? For us, just now, it's everything. It's cloud technologies, multi-cloud technologies. By the way, do you know what the difference? My brother, who is a huge specialist in computers, 2 days tried to explain me what's the difference between multi-cloud technologies and cloud. And after that, I thought, but it's some kind of fairy tale, some kind of joke. Why you are wasting so many time for that? Okay, but anyway, to summarize, are you looking to the future with optimism or with pessimism? I'm speaking about the our next future, 2021. Are you big optimist or you are big pessimist? So what will be?
I'm a big optimist, but when I say I'm a big optimist, is not necessarily because we're going to have another great equity year, but I'm very optimistic on the ability of 21 to be a game changer. I think one thing that will certainly happen is that science through the vaccine will come to our rescue in 21. And I think we're all underestimating how much pent-up demand there is in the economy. I mean, look at the balance sheet of Fed and Bank of England and ECB. It's up, 50, 70%. And as I say in the forward to this year's our rate prediction, the problem for us doing a rate prediction in 21 is that how can I be outrageous? I mean, should I say that the central bank balance sheet would be up 150%? I mean, the reality
Never.
is that no, yeah, exactly. Never in the 20 years I've done this has reality been more outrageous than it is. If I told you 1 year ago that Fed's balance sheet would be up 80%, you will have put me into a institution for insane people, right? And it did happen.
Maybe yes.
Yeah, but very optimistic because I think science comes through. I think science comes through in terms of the vaccine and it will release forces. I'm also very optimistic because I firmly believe about this concept about social stability being the number one driver of macro and politics, and that will make massive changes to the system. In other words, I think the focus on having capital return relative to have human return will change, not only because it's unjust and inequality, it's also because we have a youth generation versus a baby boomer generation gap that needs to be closed. But in history, every time we face the biggest obstacles, we have always come through. And I think if 2020 is good for anything, it is the faith that we need to put in science and evolution. So I will close by saying that I'm a firm believer that evolution is internal and infinite in structure. I am so optimistic about 21 because I think we are into the end game of this, what I call the pretended extent and capital return relatively to fairness, openness, and ability to be engaged across the globe. And when the vaccine comes down, I'm definitely coming down to see you in Tel Aviv.
There is one final question that is very important for me, and generally speaking, I think it's the key. This is the key question, is the key for the future economy. I'm speaking about the huge debt, world debt. It's the debt that more than 3 times higher than all the GDP of the world, 3.5, 3.67, I will say more than the total economic. We cannot imagine, for example, as you told, absolutely right, that, for example, the debt to GDP of France, it was something like 100%. Now it's much more, and we suppose that it will go up and up and up. But I am not afraid that the increase of total debt will influence to the fact that we will see a lot of bankruptcy processes in the 2021, 2022, because according to my view, it's a huge risk of big economy. And I will say you more. You know, one big crash of some companies can influence of crash of some industries, of crash of some countries. So there's a huge risk, isn't it?
Absolutely. But I also think that the way I like to phrase this is that the last 10 years, we didn't have a business cycle. So we didn't have this Schumpeter's cleaning out of bad businesses. We've created zombie economies, right? So for me, 21 will see a rise in defaults, but all these defaults will be constructive and productive because it basically means that we are not keeping companies, some zombie companies alive that shouldn't exist. And, you know, to be honest, a forest fire always sets, you know, I'm a farmer, so forest fires are good for the fertility of the land. And, you know, when I say if we're in the end game also means that we have a debt pre-profiling, which is basically meaning bankruptcy, negotiations, jubilees. But you know, you remember there's two ways to get out of debt. One is inflation, and the other one is to simply create more growth than the cost of your debt. And I think we will have a combination. I think we will have a little bit more inflation, and I think we will have far more productivity. So I think we will have a combination of the two, which, by the way, was also how we dealt with the same level of debt that we have after World War II. It's kind of interesting that when you talk about debt to GDP, today we have exactly the same fiscal impulse and debt to GDP that the world had after World War II. But that was a physical war. This time we have a pandemic it came at a time where the economy was weak and not really structured right, but it became World War III. So people who say we didn't have a World War III, I will disagree. I say the last 2 years has been a world war, but not fought in the classic way, but fought on systems. And those systems are in the end game. And why I'm optimistic is that I think the next cycle will be a very productive cycle and a big focus on, as I think has been the sub theme of our conversation today, you know, living in the countryside, living for less money, living better, living more informed, checking refats, access to internet, infrastructure, cheaper energy. If you combine all of the things we talked about, they have a soft component of a slight, if not very large, improvement of quality of life. And to be honest, I think a lot of people in the world is looking forward to an improvement of quality of life.
You gave a lot of predictions. Frankly, very frankly, only between me and you. Which of them is the most craziest and which is most probable? How do you think so? How do you think?
I think the most unlikely is that Amazon in any shape or form moves the headquarters to Cyprus. But I think the story there is the most interesting one. I think the most likely story is the digitalization of China. I think the move that China have done is very brave. And I think it's a seminal change, because if China creates a real valid digital centralized currency, they can open the capital account, and then the world's capital flow will start flowing significantly to the east, both because of the prospect of the IPO calendar, because of technology, because of the way and the concentration of growth in the world and the consumption in the world. So I think those two, although of course, if you ask the Chinese Communist Party, I'm sure I would be in bad standing for saying that, but I think the capital account opening in China is pretty likely to happen, to be honest.
Stin, thank you so much for your time. It was fantastic. Thank you for your answer. You know, all your predictions are brilliant. I like them very much, and frankly, every December I'm sitting and waiting. Because no, frankly, it's amazing. Why? There is a lot of humor. It's, you know, it's a boom of humor And I'm waiting to take it, to think about it, to detailize it, to smile a bit about it. But thank you so much. Thank you for you, and a huge thank for your team. It was a great job. So I wish you in the next year only one thing. You know, success you will have. A lot of customers, I believe you will have. I wish you good health. It's very important just now. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you and your audience, and know that you have, anyone needs a copy or whatever. I'm sure you make sure you get it. But it's an absolute great pleasure for me to engage in this. This is what makes life fun, and I have to admit that we do this with a huge smile. But at the same time, I think what you just said is exactly what we're trying to achieve. That, a little bit of a smile, but also, hang on a minute, inside that smile, there is something I need to think about. If we can move you 1% through publishing this outrageous predictions, we have achieved that. We don't want to convince you about anything, but we want you to question the world in a different way. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Good luck.